Everybody's ready. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. I'm State Representative Fred Strayhorn, the House Minority Leader. I am joined by two of my colleagues, joint sponsor of the bill that we're going to talk about today, Representative Jim Butler and Representative Mike Haney, and several other colleagues, President of the NAACP Dayton chapter, Derek Forward, and some other honored guests. Appreciate you being here as well. As you know, Premier Hospital Network announced the closing and intention to demolish Good Sam Hospital right here behind us some months ago, basically stating that keeping the hospital open was not financially viable any longer. While the cessation of operations at Good Sam has already occurred, many of us have argued for some time that there should be a good faith effort to either repurpose the hospital or be aggressive about finding someone else to purchase the hospital before tearing it down. Given what it means to this community, given what it means to healthcare, when we all know that time is critical in saving lives when your health is threatened. Equally disturbing, it seems to be becoming a trend around the state of Ohio to have hospitals closing in communities like Steubenville and Canton. So what has become clear that this is only become more and more frequent that other communities will face this dilemma of having critical life-saving healthcare facilities closed in their community. So while the legislation that we're going to talk about today only deals with a small part of transitioning a hospital, it is the first step to opening up a much larger conversation about how do we prevent future hospital closings around the state, and if it is absolutely necessary, what is the appropriate process for doing that? While no one wants to put an undue financial burden on Premier Network to engage in its activities, we do believe that we would like to see a more aggressive attempt to market the hospital to someone else or work with different entities to find a repurpose for the facility. At this point, I want to turn the podium over to Representative Jim Butler, who has allowed me to joint sponsor this bill with him, so he can talk about the particulars of the legislation. We will also hear from Derek Forward, President of the NAACP, and Reverend Carter.
Good afternoon, I'm Jim Butler. I'm the state representative for the 41st House District, and I sit on the Health Committee in the House. I'm a Navy veteran by vocation, and I'm an attorney practicing business law. So, I speak to you here today from the perspective of someone well acquainted with the way corporations operate. Good Samaritan Hospital's story began in 1932, when the Sisters of Charity recognized the great need for a full-service hospital right here in this area of Dayton. Under their caring eyes, Good Samaritan Hospital provided essential health care to the citizens of Dayton for the next 60 years. In the mid-1990s, Premier Health Network took over the operations of the hospital, but the Sisters of Charity retained ownership of the building, land, and assets. For the next 20 years, Premier gained control of many other hospitals, either by contracting to operate them or by buying them outright. They also expanded their network by building many new facilities, almost exclusively in wealthier areas. Premier is now a dominant hospital network in the Miami Valley with revenues of $1.7 billion, a feat of which any business would be proud. But Premier is not just any business. Premier is a designated nonprofit charity. What do true charities do? Charities provide for those most in need. Through great sacrifice, they persevere in adversity, and they stay true to their mission. Because of their great value to our society, we allow them not to pay taxes. Let me make this point very clear. We, the people, pay these businesses' share of taxes in exchange for them providing vital, charitable work in our community. What do charities not do? They do not abandon people in need in order to seek higher profits. In its dealings regarding Good Samaritan Hospital, Premier Health has acted exactly as we would expect a purely profit-driven business to act. And yet, Premier expects to continue its nonprofit status, thereby enjoying the millions of dollars in tax breaks that the citizens of this region must subsidize through our own taxes. Let me review for you some key points regarding Premier and Good Samaritan Hospital. Premier Health did not own Good Sam Hospital. It was merely the operator. The hospital and land were owned by the Sisters of Charity, now known as Catholic Health Initiatives. Premier claims that it needed to close Good Sam because it was no longer able to operate it profitably, a claim that came on the heels of building a $135 million 12-story addition to their Miami Valley Hospital campus. Yes. Having recently added beds to the downtown market, they now claim there was overbedding, which is just jargon that means that there are too many hospital beds. At this point, Premier could have simply ended their operating agreement with CHI, walked away and let market forces take their course. CHI could have partnered with some other entity, even going back to operating Good Samaritan Hospital on their own. But instead, here's what Premier did. They bought the hospital from CHI so that they could not only close it, but make sure that it stays closed forever. First, by demolishing the structure, and second, by placing a deed restriction on any new buyers, prohibiting them from ever building a new hospital with inpatient beds on this site. In January 2018, Premier agreed to give CHI a 22% ownership stake in Premier's $1.7 billion a year network to acquire Good Samaritan Hospital. A mere 2 weeks after sealing the deal on that acquisition, Premier shocked the community by announcing it was closing, and this is a very important point, planned to demolish the hospital building. In order for Premier to protect its region's leader status, it wants to make sure that no new competition sets up shop here on the Good Sam site. The deed restriction to prevent any new inpatient facility on the property is the smoking gun of their underlying motivations. Premier's business decisions are hurting the vulnerable community that the Sisters of Charity were determined to care for when they founded Good Samaritan Hospital. Instead of serving those most in need, this corporate nonprofit is actually spending large sums of money in their attempt to ensure this community does not have a hospital. In addition to the hefty price paid to acquire Good Sam, demolition costs are estimated at $16 million, which is probably an underestimate. They promised another $10 million to a variety of Westside community organizations, a tactic that tends to discourage groups in need of funding from openly objecting to their donors' plans. Premier has, from the day they announced the hospital closure, sought to characterize the Good Sam Hospital demolition as a benign action, calling it a shovel-ready plan for the next owner. I believe it is more like the military strategy called scorched earth, where an army withdrawing from a location aims to destroy anything that might be useful to their enemy, or in this case, any direct competitor. In either case, it is the common citizens who are ultimately and unfairly deprived. Premier's actions are just wrong. They are the opposite of charity. Our legislation aims to fix this injustice, and here's how it'll work. At any time after January 1st, 2018, any hospital network wishing to demolish a hospital or render it incapable of being used as a hospital must do the following. First, it must offer it for sale to the municipality or county where it is located, generally for $1, unless the land underneath the hospital is worth more than the buildings. If the city and the county do not buy it for $1, then the city or county, if the hospital is not in a city, have to affirmatively vote to allow the demolition. This would be in instances where there is a plan to build a new hospital nearby, or otherwise when demolition would be good for the community. If the city or county does not buy it, nor vote to allow demolition, then the hospital network has to put the hospital up for a public auction. Similar to a tax lien or a foreclosure sale, they have to advertise the hospital and auction date in a national hospital journal for 3 months, then hold the auction 3 to 5 months thereafter. Bidders must affirm and agree contractually to use the building as a hospital at 90% of the capacity at which the old hospital is operating. A successful bidder will continue to pay property tax on the building into escrow until reaching that 90% capacity, at which point the escrow will be returned to it. If no qualifying bids are made, the hospital network may demolish the hospital without penalty. But if a hospital network does not follow those steps to make sure that nobody else wants to operate the hospital and they go ahead and demolish the building anyway, their entire hospital network will be treated as a for-profit entity for 20 years for the purposes of commercial activity tax, sales tax, and property tax in the state of Ohio. This bill will help ensure that hospitals enjoying a nonprofit status will act in a manner consistent with a nonprofit and a charity. Premier can prove its confidence in the assertion that there's no willing entity that's willing to purchase an intact Good Samaritan Hospital building by offering it at public auction for use as a hospital. A qualified buyer at even the token price of $1 would save Premier $16 million that they've earmarked for demolition, and that savings could be redirected to providing more charity health care. If no other organization steps up to offer a qualified bid, only time will have been lost in the effort, and Premier will have demonstrated to this community that it has exhausted all possible measures to allow hospital services to continue at this location. You see here before you a coalition of citizens from a wide range of political perspectives, of religious and social service affiliations, as well as the local business community. Too often our public conflicts are oversimplistically presented as two-sided, as pro versus con, as if every situation can be likened to a sporting event or a business transaction. This does us all a disservice. But for those that need that kind of lens for understanding what we're proposing here today, we are pro-accountability. It is our duty, not just as political leaders, but as citizens, to hold institutions accountable for the claims they make, the work that they do, and especially those who profit at taxpayers' expense. Thank you for being here today and for reporting this information to the community. I'd like to thank Leader Strayhorn, Representative Haney, the NAACP, and Dr. Carter, the Coalition of Clergy. And also I'd like to thank Dr. Dave Westbrook for his efforts early on in fighting for Good Samaritan Hospital and for healthcare services for this community. I'll now turn it over to Derek Forward, the president of Dayton NAACP.
The NAACP appreciates the fact that when you have two people in the legislature, being Democrats and Republicans, because the NAACP is a nonpartisan organization. But we are an organization that's highly political, and we want to make certain that what we do is in the best interest of the American people. So when we had an opportunity to hear from both sides of the political aisle, to be able to understand the direction that they're trying to take this bill, we thought that this would be something to support. We have not had an opportunity to review the entire bill. The part of the bill that we are definitely in support of is the process, as was so eloquently stated by Representative Butler. In terms of the process, this will ensure that no matter if it's a hospital association, whether or not it's a business that's leaving a community, this is just, to us as NAACP, just a start of things, of legislation that could happen down the road for many other businesses that decide to leave the urban core. But one thing that we want to say for certain is that when you have businesses that do what we feel in this particular situation, because NAACP, even from the start of this, we have always stated that we wanted this hospital to remain open and functioning, and/or some type of healthcare facility to remain at this particular site. That has always been our position. We were the first ones out the gate to talk to Mary Busalis and Anita. The leadership of Premier. I just say it like that. We were the first out the gate to talk to the leadership of Premier to ensure and to let them know that our hope and our prayer was that this hospital remained open. And that still would be our position today. We understand that they have taken a position. We do appreciate the fact that unlike other organizations, other institutions, that they did put forth some seed money. But from my understanding and from what we've been doing as NAACP is trying to negotiate more money. So we want to be able to negotiate, well, what other dollars can come to this particular site for this community, that we want to make certain that we can do that. So from a good faith standpoint, not every company is going to do a good faith gesture to try to save a particular property or not to leave blight in the property. So that, we are not always against everything, we are not always for something, but we do have permanent interest in what we do and what we say. So from our standpoint, the bill, as we look at the process, we are in support of putting in place a process for organizations, for businesses that attempt to leave an urban core. So that is really our message. We are going to dig through the rest of the bill to kind of see what else is in the bill. We've already talked to Rep. Butler to say, hey, is there, if there's something in this bill that we want to be able to change, to modify, that's something that we will work out in time. I know we're trying to get this, that they're trying to get this done, this legislation passed before the end of the year, but there are some things that we still probably need to work out, that we need to look at in more detail. So with that, I turn over to Reverend Rockney Carter. Thanks.
Thank you. Again, I'm Dr. Carter. I represent the Clergy Community Coalition. We've been engaged in advocating for health care for the west side of Dayton since we heard about the closure, the imminent closure of Good Samaritan Hospital. I'd like to thank the legislative action that have been proposed here today by our representatives, Representative Butler, Representative Strayhorn, and Representative Haney. As we operate in our democracy of separation of powers, we need to hear from all aspects of government, whether it be the executive branch, whether it be the legislative branch, or the judicial branch. We've heard today from the legislative branch, and I'm so excited about this proposed legislation that would almost stop Premier from demolishing this building. Some time ago, we called for a stop to the demolition of the buildings. We were joined by Derek Forward and the NAACP. We were joined by the county commissioners. We were joined by the mayor and the city commissioners. But we just haven't heard from our executive leadership in the way that we should. I stand here today excited today about this prospect of this House bill. We need to slow down, if not stop Premier from demolishing this hospital. We need to slow down, if not stop Premier from taking health care away from those who desperately need it. And so I'm excited as we stand today, one with the other, to tell Premier that this community stands united in stopping them from closing the hospital, from demolishing the hospital, and not replacing this with a hospital or a medical facility that can meet the needs of the urban community here on the west side of Dayton. So again, I want to thank the community leaders of Derek Forward and his group. I want to thank the representatives who are here representing legislation that might possibly slow down Premier and make this give an opportunity to the competitors to come in and provide health care services if Premier doesn't want to. Don't put in restrictive covenants that would stop this from being a hospital. Stop impeding and standing in the way of health care services for those who desperately need it on the west side of Dayton. Thank you.
Question there?
Yeah, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
First, we got to give a shout out to Reverend Harmon Branham, also joining us today.
Is there a deadline you would need to get this passed by in order to make it still apply to Premier Health and Good Sam, or is it going to always be retroactive?
The way the bill is drafted is it is retroactive, so any demolition or physical alteration of a hospital property that happens after January 1st, 2018, so the beginning of this year, then it would qualify under the bill. And Premier has been made aware of this some months ago, so they have been on notice.
Yeah, what's a realistic timeline for this actually getting through the House and going down to the Senate, and Governor's office?
It really just depends on how lucky we are in terms of getting support from it from our colleagues and leadership. You can do an amendment to something else that's moving, and that's probably, if it's going to get done this year, it's probably going to have to be attached as an amendment to something else.
Has Premier gave any response to your resolution or your suggestion to them to do the right thing at all?
We actually, and we have press packets for everybody where there's been correspondence back and forth. We have received one letter back from Premier, and then we sent a second one back along with a copy of the bill, stating that they really just need to answer the question of why don't they put this up for public auction and let somebody else come and operate it if they don't want to.
There are stages of success in that negotiation in terms of keeping the facility or at least removing the deed restriction. There are a number of different things that can happen that we would be, supportive of.
What is your anticipation that they do? What is your hope that they do?
Well, my hope is that they will, and as you mentioned, they do the right thing. They can have discussions with the various community leaders and how they do the right thing, but ultimately what they need to do is, if they don't want to operate the hospital behind us, Good Samaritan Hospital, then they need to at least have the chance for somebody to come and try to operate it. That's something that happened in the city of Massillon, which is probably the best example. The city of Massillon had a hospital that was going to be demolished by the hospital network there. The city fought for the hospital to reopen. It was closed. There was a House bill that was passed, actually, that dealt with hospital closure, that may have persuaded that hospital network to sell that hospital to the city of Massillon for $1. And the city of Massillon has now turned around and offered it for sale to any operators out there who wanted to reopen the hospital. They had 6 different entities that actually put bids in, and the latest reports are they're in a bidding war because they want to come in and reopen this hospital and make it work. So the city is going to win in that, but the citizens in Massillon are going to win, and we hope that the citizens of West Dayton are going to win if Premier does the right thing and lets somebody else come and operate this hospital.
Yeah, ultimately we'd like to see them be more aggressive about entertaining options for it to remain a hospital from somebody else, but also deal with entities that might look at repurposing the hospital and cutting it up into different things like Saney Place. So those are the ultimate things, but again, there are other things that at a minimum do not put a deed restriction that keeps this from being a hospital later on if somebody wants to do that.
And lastly, is there anything the citizens can do to keep the pressure on?
Citizen leader.
Well, we can keep marching. We can keep rallying. We have rallies that are still being scheduled. We have prayer vigils. We need to galvanize this community. There are people who are being abandoned, and they're quietly speaking, but we need to hear their voices. So they can contact us at the Clergy Community Coalition, and they can join with us as we rally against Premier, and we hold prayer vigils that help galvanize and excite this community so that we might ensure health care services on the west side of Dayton.
We as NAACP, our hope is that as this bill continues to work its way, through the House and then potentially through the Senate, that Premier will continue and to live up to the seed money, the minimum amount of seed money that they have already offered, which is $10 million. So no matter how this bill goes, whether or not it fails or whether or not it passes, our hope is that they will continue, to produce the seed money to help redevelop the property, redevelop the land, inside of this community, and that is not ever lost, and that they are able to continue to work with the city, Dayton, our city leadership, as it relates to possibly negotiating, on additional dollars, that will help redevelop the site. And like I've always said, with the NAACP, and this is why we like the process of this bill. When you put a process in place for organizations, for big business to leave a community, an urban core, you put a process in place to hopefully alleviate that and or to apply pressure to say, well, you know what? The bill actually gives them an opportunity, to actually do the right thing. So when you think about the process that he explained, number one, it's not saying that the building even has to stay. It's a process. What is the process? The process, once again, is for the city and or the county to buy it for $1. If that doesn't happen, it goes up for auction. If it doesn't, if the bidders are not producing and or coming up with the right amount of money that for fair market value, then it goes up for demolition, what they wanted to do in the beginning. But don't lose sight of the process. The process is what is important to the NAACP. The whole process, because this will set a paradigm. This could be a paradigm shift to other businesses that choose to leave certain communities.
I mean, healthcare systems are big players in the state with, outsized influence. Do you expect, strong opposition to this bill?
Well, the answer is yes, we do. But we don't represent strong political interests. We represent the people.
That's right.
And we're going to do the right thing. That's why we're here today.
That's right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming today.